Well, hello there, everybody. This is Craig Watson from the Pacific War Channel, where we cover the entire history of the Asia-Pacific War from 1937 to 1945 and all the major events that led up to it. Joined here yet again by my co-host, Gaurov. How are you?
Hey Greg, great to be back again. And I think today's going to be a really exciting episode for our listeners.
Yes, for those listening, this is going to be part 4, although I don't think you necessarily have to watch all the parts. These are kind of episodic in their own. But we are finally arriving to the time where General Rommel is going to be in Africa with the Afrika Korps. So this is kind of, I would say, where the fanboys really get excited, because all the events before this was, exclusively the Italians versus the British. And now we're finally seeing German panzers enter the mix, and it is going to be quite the turntables, as they say. Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you know I now have a Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Over there you can find exclusive Patreon episodes and podcasts based on suggestions from patrons, and other benefits like early access to all of my content, live hangouts, your name in the end credits, and much, much more. So please go check it out.
It's a definite U-turn for, what the British have been experiencing for the past 3 months or so.
Oh, definitely.
And, I would say, the previous 3 episodes ended up being like, you can almost call it a prelude to,
Yeah, pretty much.
because with everything going around in World War II at this time, events nearby which directly influence the North African campaign also have to be considered.
Definitely. And ironically enough, I think I mentioned this in the first episode, but I'm using notes from a long series that I wrote for Kings and Generals that's exclusive for the moment on their Patreon, which is obviously the North African campaign. And we had to cover pretty much all the operations in the Western Desert campaign. Then we touched upon Tunisia, and now I've been asked to do kind of filler episodes before the Sicilian campaign. So I'm going to do one exclusively on the experience of Malta, and I am writing it right now, and borderline suicidal. Trying to fit Malta in about 2,500 words is lunacy. It's like I'm tackling it 2 sentences per month for like 3 years. That is basically what the script is, and
I
it's
mean,
painful.
yeah, and especially there's certain events, right? Especially when the Flieger Corps are launching their air attacks, then you have
Yeah,
the desperate convoys of the Royal Navy to reinforce the island.
and
But and
It's
also,
juggling between the most important convoys that I see and the limited battles that you see, because it can be Malta adjacent, we'll say, if it happens somewhere near Malta, or if it's a force emanating from Malta that attacks, the Italian Navy. Do I add it to this?
yeah,
It's very complex as a script, and it's probably the worst one I'm writing now, but
it,
it'll be made.
I'm definitely looking forward to that.
But for today, just to catch everybody up, in case you didn't watch the previous 3 episodes, more or less, Mussolini Mussolini unleashed an invasion of Egypt. It went terribly wrong. So wrong that what was initially like a 5-day raid to try and harass the Italians as they're invading, the British managed to not only do that, they full on turned this into an offensive, even though they had a fraction of the forces the Italians had. And they pushed them literally across North Africa, taking almost the entire 10th Army as prisoners in the process. An incredible
Yeah,
feat.
and if I'm not mistaken, I think they are like what 500, 600 miles into Libya. So that is from the Egyptian border. So this is like an advance of like 800 kilometers, miles, whatever. It's huge distance. And
It's
let's not
incredible.
forget the British did it with an army that was just a fraction of the size of the Italians.
Yeah, so I think the prisoners would outnumber them more
Four
than
to one.
4 to 1 about. Yeah, jeez. So 4 to 1. So just the logistics of taking care of these prisoners, because it, not to say it's a gentleman's war, but I mean more so than other places like between the Japanese and Chinese, or the Russians and the Germans. This is a very different type of war. So they're taking prisoners of war. They're treating them, I'd say, pretty well. So, that's going to cost you food, it's going to cost you water, fuel to truck these guys, over to places like
Mm.
in Egypt and that,
And manpower to keep them on the guard.
and manpower, keeping them under guard. So it's certainly it's a feat of its own. The fact that the British, this is called Operation Compass for those wondering, the fact that they're able to push as far as they did while taking these prisoners is very impressive.
Indeed.
But this catches us up to the moment now. Mussolini has more or less done many actions that have embarrassed the Axis forces. He's failed to invade Egypt. Literally, he's on the defensive there. He's failing within Greece. It's pretty terrible invasion of Greece. Should have never happened in the first place. And it's basically forced Hitler's hand. So Hitler initiates Operation Sonnenblumen. And this is basically bringing over these motor mobile units with General Rommel over to North Africa. And as we famously call it to this day, or if you go to any store and you look for a World War II book on North Africa, it'll be titled something something Afrika Korps, I'm sure. This is the Afrika
Yeah.
Korps finally in North Africa. Well, I think I heard a car horn there.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I guess people are very excited today. I don't know for what. So,
So what we're going to be seeing now is, and by the way, it was Directive number 22 when Hitler issued this on January the 11th of 1941. And to kind of give, I know a lot of people probably don't have a map in front of them, but if you do, the British have pushed literally as far as, what is the name of the town? It's Al-Gaid, I believe. It's very far to the left. El
one
Agheila.
moment. Elagela, yeah.
Yeah. So this is extremely far into enemy territory, and the British have basically they've pushed too far for their own logistics. So they're not even setting up defense, like not real defensive lines over there. So more or less, when Rommel is going to be coming into this, he's basically got free range for quite a while to just push forward, and we're going to see that. I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
wanted to add anything before we go into kind of the push.
Yeah, actually, there are a couple of points I do want to add. Like this is more about the strategic situation and Malta.
Yeah.
So, first of all, like as we discussed in the previous episode, Malta was never pummeled by the Italians as they should have, given its
Yeah.
strategic importance. And, it had been a thorn in the Italian side. Now, the Luftwaffe Fliegerkorps have arrived and they are now operating out of southern Italy. And, I think some units by now would be coming into Sicily. Right.
Yes.
Now, right now, it's just like, just the Stukas and some medium bombers, but they give Malta a good pasting,
Yeah, it's
over the
exponentially
next,
different from the Italian
yeah,
bombings. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And, I think what, like as we, I think discussed, Malta's hardly been reinforced. And, they just have like, at the moment, just a few Hurricanes and Gladiator biplanes that are its air defense, like, sorry, the Air Force arm. And because of this, uh, the they're not able to interdict the German forces that are moving in. So as Rommel has to assemble his forces in Tripoli because that's the biggest port, and the Axis, between January and April, they send about 320,000 tons of supplies. So it's about 80,000 tons a month and they lose a grand total of just about 18,000 tons, which is like, 95% of the supplies have reached.
Yep.
And it's a similar percentage, right? They get almost 97, almost 72,000 out of 74,000 of the troops successfully into North Africa. So now you have a rearmed army. So it is quite a failure about Malta, but also credit to what the Luftwaffe had been doing until now. So and I'll add chime into this a bit later. But Malta's situation is going to get even more desperate when a couple of squadrons of the Messerschmitt's 109s come into play. And the RAF is going to have no answer for quite a while because the only aircraft that the British possess right now that can take on a Messerschmitt 109 is the Spitfire, and
And they don't have
they've
one.
not yet been they have not yet been sent to because I think they were still worried about the security of the home islands.
Yes.
So it's still I'll just say they will be you know going to be, on the back foot. Like, I think the Staffel commander, Oberlieutenant Joachim Münchenberg, I'm sorry if I pronounced his name wrong. I think in a short span of time, his Staffel got 46 air victories with him taking 20 alone.
Yes, and a large reason for it is not just because the BF, the Messerschmitt BF, is better. It's simply better than the Hurricane, but the pilots were notably better, and the tactics used by the IRF in Malta are extremely obsolete. They weren't even using the Finger Four until actually they received the Spitfires, and another commander comes aboard. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true. And I think that's also, this also led to like, the Axis early in January, right?
yes,
Stepping up their attacks, and their main target was actually the carrier HMS Illustrious.
yeah, they were
Now, they
hunting it down.
do, yeah, and they do have some success, right? They score the hits on the Southampton and what's like Gloucester, which are both, light cruisers. And, you know, it was such a successful raid that, Southampton was so badly knocked, they just basically scuttled the ship. It's like, yeah, it's not even worth saving. And, Illustrious gets damaged, has to retreat back to Alexandria in a couple of weeks later, sorry. Then they somehow sneak it out of the Mediterranean, and it's
Out
going to be in
for a
American
year.
waters for a year.
And
I
just for
mean,
the
that
audience to
it's
know, the Illustrious is attacked at sea. They get forced to port in Malta, where it is attacked for a few days. And it's actually called the Illustrious Blitz by the civilian population in Malta because of the sheer amount of bombing against this vessel. It gets hit multiple times. It limps to Alexandria. It's actually a miracle it gets away.
Yeah, it took 3 days for that voyage, right? Which
Yeah.
must have indicated how badly damaged it was, because it's not even sailing the breadth of the entire sea. So, but yeah, and the thing is that Luftwaffe hardly took any losses, while the reinforced Malta defenses took a battering. The civilians and the airstrips also took it, but luckily for the civilians, the Germans seemed to focus only on, you know, the port facilities and the military installations in the city. So at least
Yeah.
for the civilians, when they moved to the rural community, they were safe. But so this has allowed, Rommel to successfully land. And while we were also speaking about Mussolini and embarrassment of the Axis, this wasn't the only front. At the same time, you know, Greece had been invaded by the Italians. Not a really good invasion. They thought that, they would just liquidate and walk over, but, the Greeks mobilized. And, even though the Greeks had, I think, 14 divisions facing the Italian army in January or early Feb, okay, which is most of their military strength. And even though the Greeks have a longer supply line than the Italians, right? Because the Italians have been pushed back into Albania. So they're no longer on the border. They're in Albania now, which the Italians had occupied before the invasion. So ideally, the Italians should be in a better position because, hey, the supply lines are shorter. It's
Yes,
quicker to
yeah.
get man and material. But their supply situation was even worse with the shorter supply line, which just highlights their inefficiency and shortcomings in this war, which again, this is worrying Hitler because Greece has friendly relationships with Britain, who they also are economically dependent. And, he's humiliating his most important ally in Europe. And if Britain sends in troops, which is exactly what some of Wavell's decisions get influenced by this,
Yes.
he's worried that they might set up bases and that could strike the Romanian oil fields, which is very critical. So,
It's basically
this
the
is like,
last lifeline of the Germans, like for everything that they have, that they have such insignificant oil reserve. Like there's no other oil that they can actually rely on other than the Romanian oil for most of World War II. Yeah.
yeah. So, the idea is because, as we are approaching 1941, the middle of the year, we know Operation Barbarossa is being planned. The German army is being refitted and redeployed to the east. But at the same time, he knows he needs to secure the southern flank to protect the Romanian oil fields. Like, I think that, and also, I think it would have been of equal importance knowing Hitler's ego to avenge and show that the Axis are not to be messed with.
Yeah, there's
So,
definitely an element to that to this.
this was the situation which, no doubt influenced the Germans to send in immense forces to both theaters of war and drag them into the southern hemisphere of their Pact of Steel, right,
Yeah.
as they call it.
And actually picking up right from there, because it's actually a good segue. On February the 9th, Sir Winston Churchill, he ordered a lot of the most experienced and best equipped units of the Western Desert Force to be diverted for Operation Lust. So to go over to help the Greeks out with, possibly dislodging the Italians, even from Albania. It was actually possible if the Germans didn't come in. The Italians were in such disarray that they could have been dislodged from most of the Balkan region. It was that bad. But by late
Oh,
March, yeah,
indeed.
yeah.
Yeah, and it was just so bad that I'm pretty sure the generals, when they had to formally call on the Germans for assistance, who pretty much had already planned for everything by then. I'm pretty sure it was such a bitter ego pill to
Oh,
swallow.
it was very embarrassing, and it's one that they actually continuously had to do in World War II until the Italians changed
Yeah.
sides, just like World War One. But yeah, by late March, Rommel, he's coming to North Africa, like you said. For the audience, as a rule of thumb, when Malta is being hit very hard, it's kind of, we can almost call it like it's being neutralized. And when Malta gets neutralized, there's such a greater percent chance that the Axis will be able to move some convoys successfully to,
Yeah.
land in places like Libya, for example, or Tunisia. Whereas for the majority of the time, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force are doing such a colossally good job at just tackling these convoys and thwarting efforts to even send convoys. So the Axis always have a lot of trouble getting supplies over. So it's really significant that the first round when Rommel's coming over, he gets this huge batch of supplies. It's gonna feed him for quite a while because after that he's gonna have a lot of problems. But he comes
Yeah,
over.
and
Yep.
and this is at least the time. And if for people who might wonder, okay, Malta's air force is neutralized. What happened about the Royal Navy? Because they had a sizable fleet, there. But the problem is the Luftwaffe have Fliegerkorps 10 now, pretty much operational or fully operational by now. Now they're also being reinforced by Messerschmitt fighters.
Yeah,
So the bombers can just focus on bombing. They don't have to worry about enemy aircraft because that's what the Messerschmitts are there for. And these guys are also okay, like, the cannons and machine guns of a fighter do pack quite a punch. So, even like motor torpedo boats or even I think up to destroyers can be engaged by a fighter and cause damage. So with this air superiority at the moment that they have, it's almost safe for any Axis convoy to pass.
definitely. And it's going to be kind of like a boxing match where they're going to be continuously fighting for air superiority. And it really does revolve around the situation with Malta. Entire squadrons of aircraft will come and go through Malta, often going to places like Egypt and such to reinforce North Africa. And every time there's a large convoy that comes over for the Allies, it kind of, let's say, it neutralizes the Axis threat for like a limited window sometimes. If not, it causes major battles, as there's really big naval battles in the Mediterranean that almost no one ever talks about. But when
True.
Rommel come, oh yeah,
Yeah, I just like, just speaking of Malta, I think at the end of Feb, I think they were just down to about 10 workable hurricanes on the island
yeah,
and they don't have spares. That's how bad it was.
yeah. But every single time they get knocked out, a large convoy always successfully brings over quite a lot of hurricanes, and then they get knocked out. It's actually incredible to look at the numbers. It's like a stock market of aircraft that are operational in Malta. It goes up and down. But
I mean, I
Rommel,
just feel like that was the only job of the British carriers at this time,
yeah.
flying
Well, yeah, it's
aircraft to
mostly
Malta.
mostly it's British aircraft carriers coming over and then they're launching aircraft and then aircraft they're coming from Gibraltar to try and like aid those aircraft coming over, and that's kind of like I guess what you would call these runs that go the Malta runs, we'll call them. There's actually specific
Yeah.
names for them, like there's the club run and all that, but it's very confusing, the convoy system. But yeah. But to go back to Rommel, he's showing up with 155 Panzers, and these are Panzers 1 to 4s. I mean, we've been kind of like laughing and talking about like the Italian tanks and tankettes. All of these panzers are more than capable of facing what the British are. Most of them much more impressive than the British tanks. And they're actually going to be coming somewhat modified. A lot of them are going to have extra bolted plates and holes cut into their engine hatch covers to increase the radiator fan speed for desert warfare. It provides better cooling.
That's
And
actually
yeah.
such an important step that the Germans undertook for this, because can't underestimate how much the sand destroys the machines of both
Hmm.
sides also. Which is why, I think the Italians never did that really. We know the British did it and the Germans did it.
Yeah. I don't know if you do you are you much of a tanky? Do you want to talk a little bit about the Panzers at all? Because I'm not much of a tanky myself.
I don't have too much knowledge honestly about the tanks, except uh but I did actually wanted to speak a little bit of how Rommel, actually came into,
Yeah, sure.
so the thing is, Rommel, interestingly, I think just towards the build-up of World War II was still an infantry guy. He was not in the Guderian school of thought, of
True.
using the armor as a the punch, right?
Yeah.
For lack of better. But I think he was already noted well by, Hitler and all. So, when, he did want to get a command, because I think he did look at, joining the armored corps, and he was initially given the armored brigade that was protecting Hitler during the Polish campaign. And then he kind of lobbied to, get a posting in, you know, an armored division. And
Yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, he would have been in one of Guderian's Panzer Corps. So he was given the 7th Panzer Division. And he kind of got lucky in this because he did supersede quite a few generals. But, he got William List and Guderian and Hitler support. So, yeah, especially with Hitler's support, there's nothing going to stop. And
Yeah.
he does quite well because he is a very aggressive commander, which is something we will see. His armored car will be slightly behind his frontline reconnaissance battalions and slightly ahead of his leading panzers. He will be going, observing, supervising direct construction of bridges and other troop crossings, mapping out areas. So, he does very well. I think his first major success was on 16th May, where he took 10,000 French prisoners from the Second Army Corps, and he
Yeah.
only lost 36 men.
Yeah, certainly proved
And
himself.
yeah, so, no doubt, so then again, it's kind of like, from a military standpoint, most of the armed forces generals take a sideshow because, for a long time, it's just really the air and naval battles. So the
True.
thing is,
That's true.
he has a cult Hitler likes. He has an ego, he is
Oh
one of the
yes.
biggest egos.
He's got a big ego, yeah.
And so, he gets the posting, and we will see, like, he does come over here. And, I also have to say he was the top two personalities in the North African campaign ever. One was Erwin Rommel, and the other was actually a German pilot. I don't know if you've actually heard of Hans Joachim Marseille.
No, actually, no.
Um, with he was a German ace. He died slightly before the Second Battle of El Alamein, but credited with 158 victories.
That would have been over Malta then.
No. And
It was against the
all
Western
but
Desert. It was against in
yes,
North Africa. Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Only 107
Wow.
victories came elsewhere. Otherwise, everything else was against the Western Desert Force.
Wow, that
So
geez, that is impressive.
he was quite well known even amongst the allies. I think there's a story like, he did see the thing as a duel and all of that. So he would never, like, if a pilot crash lands, he would never shoot him. He would only strafe his aircraft after the guy exists. But, you have two great personalities coming in. So I know I digressed a bit, but it's going to be good to now talk about Rommel's opening maneuvers.
Yes. And I think it'll be interesting for people to know. They probably, a lot of people who kind of just see the surface of this wouldn't realize that Rommel's technically not the commander, like, well, the head commander. He has tactical command, but he's actually still under General Garibaldi, the commander of the Italian 10th Army, which is shattered at this point, needs to rebuild itself. And he's being given orders at the beginning to defend Tripoli and Tripolitania using aggressive tactics. So this is kind of like telling the guy, okay, don't go on a full offensive just yet. Get a basis, form your bridgehead, but if you see something, exploit it. It's kind of like what he's being told. And the Axis intelligence, they indicate that the Allies are actually reducing in strength. This is because they're seeing what's happening in Greece, and they can see that Churchill is taking a few divisions out. And this prompts Rommel to actually launch an offensive. And to just brutally summarize, Rommel spends most of the North African campaign just screaming at his superiors that he just wants to continuously go on the offensive, and he's demanding more supplies, particularly fuel, from the Italians. He'll make countless flights to Rome to just plead with the Italians to the point where, at one point, the Italian Navy has to actually take some of its fuel out of its ships for him,
Yeah.
which, it
Uh,
says a lot.
but at the same time, he was not well known to cooperate with the Italians because
No.
officially he's not the commander in chief. I think the
Nope.
Germans only get supreme command of the theater, I think, like in 1942 onwards, like just
Yeah,
around El
but
Alamein. But
you're gonna hear people, even in the audience, people who know, it's one of those things on paper where it's on paper he's not in command, but no, he is. Like there's only a few instances I've come across where the Italian superiors like tell him no, or worse, when they revise some of his plans. So for example, in the Tunisian campaign, at the end half of the North African campaign, Rommel comes up with some fantastic battle plans for like the Battle of the Kasserine Pass. And the Italians revise these plans and they make grave errors, and Rommel kind of has like hissy fits. And in that particular case, he has to go along, and I quote unquote going along is like he kind of compromises. He just tries to just force the issue though. Basically, he'll say he'll do something the Italians want, but once the battle commences, then he just does whatever his plan was. That's kind of what I always see Rommel doing. Yeah.
yeah, and I think you were asking a bit about the tanks that, the Afrika Korps got. So predominantly, I think, if I'm not mistaken, at this point, they had basically Panzers II to Panzers IV, right?
Actually, I have the numbers for the audience. There's 155 or so tanks. There's about 25 Panzer Is, 45 Panzer IIs, 61 Panzer IIIs, and 17 Panzer IVs. And the Panzer IVs being quite extravagant.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because see, the Panzer One, I guess, is not. I think it's like it's more of a heavily armored car
Yes.
compared to armored cars. So
Yeah.
because its main thing is a machine gun, it doesn't even have like a proper turret. But one thing, these German tanks, they have a far better speed and
Yes.
range than even the Italians and British. Like the Matilda off road was going at a speed of like 10 kilometers an hour.
Yeah. It was atrocious.
But this Panzer One, for example, is 25 kilometers. Then you have the Panzer Two, which I think right now is a light tank. You know, I don't think it had its main gun. Right now was a 20 centimeter gun, but it had more armor than the Italians, and it had a far better range and speed again.
Mhm.
This is this is quite important because Rommel is all about speed of attack.
Yes.
He doesn't care about anything else. Outflanking, speed of attack, and hammer them hard. Supplies, not my problem.
Mhm.
This is actually going to be his Achilles heel. Like, I think
Yes.
that's his biggest shortcoming as a general. The Panzer III is, the the big, I'll call it now right now the Matilda killer because the Matildas have been the British trump card. They're like, as I call them, the mobile fortresses.
Yes.
But first of all, the Panzer III, right? It had, you know, a good armor, and which kept getting upgraded. So it's already starting off with 30 armor, but its guns go up to 50 millimeter, and I think
Big.
the most last variants have like know, 75 millimeters. So that's a big gun
And
because
it's the
75
tank that
millimeters.
it's kind of it's
Seven,
also going to be the main tank for quite a long time because yes, there are Panzer IVs and later on there'll be Tigers, but the Panzer III is kind of the predominant tank that we're going to see the most being used.
yeah. And the 50 centimeter and 75 millimeter guns, like let's just put it like this,
Precise.
the late war Shermans were pretty much 75 millimeters. So
Yeah,
it has that power. Okay, so you have that, and this is gonna, even the 37 millimeter, I think, has more than enough punch to take out the Matilda at a comfortable distance.
definitely.
And again, its off-road speed is more than twice as fast as the Matilda. I mean, granted, that's not a high mark, but again, speed is everything. And the Panzer IV, on the other hand, that was like there's no, and one thing we should also just mention about the Matilda, very great, very heavily armored and could take on the Italian tanks, but it was woefully undergunned for a tank its size. It should have
Yes,
had a bigger gun. So it is not it's barely able, it would be able to take out a Panzer III in close quarters combat,
if it got up to it.
but
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, true. But it does not have the power to take on a Panzer IV, not even close.
yeah,
And the Panzer IV, well, that is like, it's gonna be like the Matilda equivalent in a way,
yep.
because it has its front armors already at 80 millimeters.
That's
And it has a
a
75
lot.
millimeter guns.
Yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
boy. Yeah,
And again, like this heavy one can have a sustained off-road speed of like, 16 kilometers an hour, sustained. And the craziest thing about the Panzer IV, its cross-country range could be up to 200 kilometers an hour. Sorry, 200 kilometers range.
yeah, that's intense.
Cross-country, this is not even counted like, using the efficient roads. I mean,
Yep.
that's insane. So, you know, the British are in for a nasty surprise, especially like, their main armored division's gone back to refit because it's worn out. And bulk of the big troops are the good troops have gone to Greece, because they know the German invasion is soon.
And Rommel's not going to just, of course, have his Panzer divisions behind him. He's got the support of Fliegerkorps 10 under General Hans Geisler. He's got about well, at this point, it's going to change all over time. 120 long-range bombers, 150 dive bombers, 40 fighters, and 20 reconnaissance aircraft available in the area. But this changes every single month. The aircraft, it's very complicated, the air war at this time. And they're flying things like Junkers Ju-87 medium bombers, Junkers Ju-88 dive bombers. Heinkel He, excuse me. God, it's doing too many Chinese podcasts. 111 torpedo bombers and the Messerschmitt Bf 110 fighters. The Messerschmitt Bf being like outclassing anything the British have at this moment
The 110, the ME 110 actually was not that great of a fighter. It was
compared to
much
the.
better as a night fighter.
Oh,
But
true.
the Hurricanes could take it on easily. It
Okay.
was the 109 that, until the arrival of the Spitfires and later the American aircraft, is the 109 is the king of the
Yeah, the
air.
109 variant F is the one that's going to
Indian.
dominate Malta for like a few months straight. And the RAF has, no, they can't even do anything for months. It's just atrocious. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the spearhead is going to be the Fliegerführer Africa of General Stefan Frohlich, who's going to basically, his job's just going to be hit British supply lines. So any of these convoys trying to hit North Africa and such, or even overroad from Egypt. There's also the Italian air forces. So you still have Squadra 5 who's been around, and they're flying, less impressive aircraft. But when it comes to bombers, it's less, it's not as problematic, I'd say. And
Mhm.
don't need to go through the long list. Their main fighter is the Fiat CR-42. That's kind of what they've been flying this whole time to try and fight off the British. And the Royal Air Force in the Middle East, they've got a few hundred aircraft, and we've already named, like, you got the Gloucester Gladiators, you got the Hurricanes and such. And they
Yeah,
got a lot
but
of
this
obsolete.
is yeah, the thing is, the Gladiator is also going to get smashed by the 110. So,
Oh, it's yeah, it's pretty bad. And then for
yeah.
bombers, they got the Bristol Bombays, they got the Blenheims and such. But yeah, the RAF are going to have a pretty rough time of it. Now, to go back to the situation, The Western Desert Force, or WDF, if we were using acronyms and such.
Yeah.
So they're pulling back basically to Egypt after this really long pursuit. They're leaving the defense of Cyrenaica to Lieutenant General Philip Neame, who's in command of the 9th Australian Division, the 2nd Armored Division, and General Archibald Wavell, the commander in chief of the Middle East, and I mean the guy running this entire show for quite a while. He believes that there's not going to be an Axis offensive until at least May, so he orders a static defense. This is basically leaving a lot of room open for Rommel just to kind of clean house, and it's going to offer the Allies less time to prepare a real defensive line, and they won't know exactly where. If the Axis attack, Neame, he's given orders that he needs to do delaying actions for about the next 2 months, which they're not going to really get. So we come to
Yeah.
Rommel, where he is. He's going to begin his advance on March the 24th, and he's going to quickly recapture El Agahila, which wasn't really defended in the first place, mind you. By April the 1st, the 5th Leichte Division, Leichte being light, so this is a light armor division, they brush aside the 2nd Armor Division at Mersa Brega. And I mean, basically, after fighting just a little bit, the British are just pulling out because they realize they're completely outmatched, so they can't even engage the enemy properly. And they're going to
Mhm.
continue withdrawing east. Rommel then he forms 3 groups. So the way that the Germans are working this, basically the groups are named after the commander, and these are going to be mobile groups. So there's Group Streik, Schwerin, and Fabris, and they're given orders to attack Benghazi, Musus Miceli, and Tengeder in order to threaten the Allied lines of communication. In response to this, Wavell seizes direct command, and he brings over Lieutenant General O'Connor to advise Lieutenant General Neame. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. It's kind of pretty typical of the British. They lose faith in their commanders in the field, and then they will like bring the replacement commander to kind of threaten
Yeah.
that commander in a way, and it almost inevitably sees the guy getting relieved.
Yeah, it's not good for your command because, if you just
Wow.
keep rotating through guys,
There's pros and
it's like
cons
a
to
revolving
this.
door.
The British are very ruthless in World War II with getting rid of sacking commanders, and I don't disagree with that mentality because
It's not. It's actually quite good because, I would say this overall by say late 1942, the average quality of British divisional commanders was far better than say what their army was in 1940.
of course, and
So, I mean,
yeah, it's going to
sometimes
pay dividends.
it's not gonna be, a good choice or, sometimes they get it wrong, but overall we know the quality of the leadership goes up drastically. Because like right now, Richard O'Connor's like an exception in the British Army as a very good commander, but it's still a learning phase also for the entire British and its imperial forces.
Yeah, for sure. And by April the 4th, Rommel, he's advanced as the 2nd Armored Division falls back to Miceli. Miceli is going to get surrounded, and this is going to prompt Lieutenant General O'Connor to initiate a general withdrawal. So, like I said before, they were doing delaying actions. This is a full-on withdrawal now. And it's going to see the 7th and 9th Australian Divisions and the 2nd Support Group prepare a defense of Tobruk. I think we had mentioned last episode, a way to look at Tobruk compare it to Benghazi, it's kind of like a smaller version of Benghazi. It's not capable
Mhm.
of large convoys giving like large amounts of supplies, but small convoys and supplies can be kept in Tobruk. So it is strategic in a sense. It's
It
not
would at
enormous.
least alleviate some
Yeah.
of its supply lines, but the reason I guess he could not ignore it was the size of the garrison, because if
Yes.
I'm not mistaken, they had well over 20,000 guys there.
Oh yes, we're going to get to that. But one thing that I will say to the audience is Tobruk changes hands a few times between the Italians and Germans and the Allies. And while it is useful to have, it's significantly more useful for the Allies because the British are more capable of getting convoys to Tobruk, whereas the Axis are very incapable of getting convoys to Tobruk. It's kind of way too far into enemy territory, and the RAF can just assail them. So it's very difficult for anything to make it there. So still everything kind of has to go over land, and anything that goes over land takes trucks, and trucks take fuel, and 50% of the fuel is used. So it's really logistically this is much worse for the Axis overall.
Yeah, and like it's also such a short route for the Royal Navy.
Yeah.
You know, that's how Tobruk lasted for so long, the defense.
Yeah,
Because
a
the Royal
significant
Navy
one.
was able to, yeah. And yeah, just I think just when we reach a part of Tobruk, I'll just add something else going on in the broader theater.
Oh, sorry, you're gonna add something?
Like I think when we just proceed a bit further on the
Oh, sure.
timeline.
Yeah. So the Second Armored Division, they attempt to break out of Miceli, and this sees about 3,000 of their men surrendered to the 17th Pavia Division. By April the 10th, Rommel's most advanced forces, they're beginning to surround Tobruk, starting a siege that's going to last 231 days. It's quite famous. There's been quite a few books written on it. I'm not sure if there's a movie based off of this siege of Tobruk. I think there, I remember seeing something. It could have been perhaps a history documentary, but it's pretty well known. It was very
Yeah, because
intense.
if I'm not mistaken, the defense of Tobruk that was holding off the Axis and German forces, right? That was like, Winston Churchill's big rallying card to try to drum up support in the US before their entry into the war.
Yeah,
So,
they're
he's
calling
like,
it like the
look at
rats of
Tobruk, yeah.
Tobruk. I think they were called like
Yeah.
the rats of Tobruk. And yeah, it was used for propaganda purposes to kind of push the Americans into, well, anytime that they could like stab Hitler with propaganda, they would. So any type of resistance, And in North Africa, when Rommel's going to start winning these victories, they kind of were looking for anything to increase morale because it was pretty brutal.
Yeah. And I know you did mention briefly about the Navy, right? The Royal Navy's ability to supply
Hmm.
right now because, they control all the strategic islands. You
Yep.
know, this is key, and that is kind of reinforced actually by a battle at Cape Matapan, which is quite a big victory for the Royal Navy. The
Yes, it
Italian
was.
Navy sailed out, so they decided to sail out for the first time since I think Toronto, and it is quite a big force by the Italians, right? Right. They are sending, one battleship, which was the Vittorio Veneto, one of their most recent battleships, and they sent in six heavy cruisers
Yep.
and two light cruisers with a screening force of, if I'm not mistaken, about 13 to 14 destroyers. And these the heavy cruisers are like 15,000-ton behemoths in their own right, which it's crazy, right? Back in World War I, that would be the displacement of a full dreadnought battleship.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Admiral Cunningham dispatches the Royal Navy, and this is also quite a significant force by the British. They have you know, the a carrier HMS Formidable and three battleships, Warspite, Valiant, and Barham,
Yeah, the
which,
war spite
are,
is pretty legendary. Yeah.
yeah. And these are, mind you, these are the old battleships, okay? These
Yeah.
battleships, if I'm not mistaken, were constructed pre-world, like they're dreadnought class, but they were completed before World War I broke out. So it's quite old. And, seven light cruisers and 70 destroyers. So again, the British utilize their air and night action because, they have superior cruise and radar. But the crazy thing is, the British destroyer force, which is supposed to be the screen and the first contacts, right, in these naval engagements, because you don't want to risk your capital assets.
Of course.
The British destroyer force actually never really made contact for a while. But, and that really got Admiral Cunningham quite unhappy because he wanted them to try to at least try to get on to the Vittorio Veneto and just, sink that battleship because that would have been a big blow. But
Yeah.
ultimately, this is quite a big defeat for the Italians, okay? Because, so let me just first narrate the Italian losses, okay? They have 2,300 sailors killed, almost more than 1,000 captured. Three heavy cruisers and two destroyers are sunk, and a destroyer and the battleship are damaged. And usually, ships damaged, it can mean at least 2 weeks in port minimum.
Definitely.
And definitely depending on the damage. The British, on the other hand, one aircraft destroyed, three killed, and four of the light cruisers suffering some light damage. That's
Yeah, it
it.
was pretty brutal. And we're
Yeah,
talking
and
about the Italian Navy who just took a thrashing from Taranto, and a bunch of their capital ships are knocked out already for half a year through repairs. So, yeah, these kinds of losses for the Italian Navy, it's colossal because if you don't have a numerical superiority. You're not going to go out to sea again. So
It,
yeah.
true. Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, after this battle, we won't see the Italian Navy coming out, you know, for almost a year.
Yeah, they're going to
I
be
don't think.
relying on their motor. What do you call them? They have a special version of motor torpedo boats that they send after Malta, and then famously the human torpedoes and their
Yeah,
submarine
the
force.
frogmen and all, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's going to be
But
kind of their fighting
but
capability.
what at least what will be lucky for them is, the Germans will occupy Crete soon. So
Yeah,
at least that's a big air threat against the Royal Navy.
definitely. And
Yeah, I guess.
well, back to Tobruk, as you had said, they got about 25,000 British and Australian troops. To be specific, the garrison, it's mostly the Australian Ninth Division of Major General Leslie Morshead. It's actually a name I know. They have a cadre of Brigadier Reynold Remington's 3rd Armored Brigade, who was refitting at Tobruk at the time, which is very unfortunate for him, consisting of 2 composite regiments, with the 15th being a light, the 26th being a cruiser, and a troop of 4 tanks. And they're going to be actually used to raid Axis supply convoys. So whenever they can break out and kind of raid and do things, they will. And so that's all going to be under Morshead, and he's going to be supplied by Egypt via the Navy. So unlike the Axis, whenever they get Tobruk, he's got pretty dependable supply lines from the sea. Tobruk's defenses consist of 2 lines of concrete bunkers extended from the port, forming a perimeter around 48 kilometers long, just enough to keep the port out of artillery range. And by the way, a lot of these defenses were created by the Italians. So it's kind of the British come in, they build over the Italian ruin, and then once the Axis take over, they build over the British defenses. And it's kind of both sides keep doing that. And there was an unfinished anti-tank ditch. There's some barbed wire. There's a second line 3 kilometers behind the first line. And the Australian 20th, 26th Brigades, they're going to be taking up covering positions outside the perimeter. And the rest are going to just man these lines. As far as kind of artillery is concerned, they got about 4 25-pounder regiments, 2 anti-tank regiments, an anti-tank company per brigade, and the British 4th Anti-Aircraft Brigade defending the harbor area. And I can't remember, but there are some ships in port at Tobruk that are strong enough to kind of thwart the Axis from coming into the port to attack them. So I can't remember what ships those are. They actually add to the defense if you think about it. Uh, Rommel's going to unleash a night attack on April the 13th, and he's going to be tossing the 5th Panzer Regiment, and they're going to try and cross over the anti-tank ditch west of El Edim Road. So basically what you would be seeing if you were there is kind of German Sapers filling in the anti-tank ditch to provide a bridge to let the armor storm over. But they're
Mhm.
repulsed by the 2 and 17th Australian Battalion and 2 RAF squadrons. So the Western Desert Fort, I keep doing that. The Western Desert Air Force, they're going to periodically be flying over Tobruk to try and cover while the Axis are doing the identical thing. And both sides are going to
Yeah.
be attacking each other's airfields to try and thwart them from being able to come over. So whoever gets air superiority, basically that dictates the offensive actions of the day. So the Allies have air superiority. The Germans are less likely to actually try and push against them. They're just going to rely on their siege tactics. Whereas if the Axis look like they're controlling the air, they'll like really push as much as they can. That's basically how it works for more than 230 days. At dawn, they make another attack, and it's by the 5th Panzer Regiment, and it breaches through, and they're heading north towards the harbor. So they've stormed in, they've breached it. They're quickly engaged by the 1st Royal Horse Artillery and British cruiser tanks, losing 16 out of 38 tanks before they have to retreat. So they took quite a licking. And from what I've read, the majority of damage to panzers is the result of anti-tank teams. It's usually not allied armor. So the
Yeah,
greatest threat is that, yeah.
and I think we'll also see, right, the biggest tank killers no is the tank killers in this campaign, aircraft and anti-air or anti-tank guns.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. It's surprising for people who envision these grand. There are grand tank battles. Don't get me wrong, but more or less, it's kind of anti-tank guns. It's artillery that's really going to knock out a lot of the tanks and such, and mines. So, I mean, no one wants to hear it, but mines take a lion's share of taking down armored vehicles to this very day. Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it, without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software, and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video. The Axis infantry, meanwhile, who are behind these tanks, they're met by artillery, and they're also met by the 8th Machine Gun Battalion, and they're going to lose about 75% of their men in a large assault, while the 5th Leica
Ouch.
Division, yeah, it's pretty bad. The 5th Leica
That
Division,
battalion's gone. That battalion's gone.
yeah, they're not combat effective, and they can't be retrained or anything on the spot, so they're pretty much done. The 5th Leica Division, they're going to be forced to dig in. So that's a light tank division, by the way. It's part of the Afrika Korps. And further to the south, the Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica, they fly nearly 1,000 sorties against Tobruk on the 14th, seeing like 40 Stukas dive bomb the defenses. And Stuka dive bombers, they don't have large payloads because these aren't, like heavy bombers or anything. So what kind of damage they're doing to fortified positions is, I would say, questionable. It has a morale effect. It definitely demoralizes the
It
defenders.
definitely is a morale effect because, see, the Germans had the principle, like, that they want to use the dive bomber to try to make precision strikes. But, against a fortified now, if you're doing it against a factory or something like that, or a bridge, I can see the merit of this. But, against a fortified position, you need heavy bombs. That's kind of where, we would later see like the British and American heavy bomber fleets were doing so much damage because each is like carrying 6 tons of bombs.
Yeah.
Stuka, I think, if I'm not mistaken, maximum payload is about half a ton.
Yeah,
two
about.
50-pound, two 50-pound bombs on each. But as you said, the morale effect, the demoralizing effect it had, because it acquired a legendary status during the Battle of France. And I read that, some German Stuka pilots, they kept like a siren underneath their airframe
Yeah, it's
to
famous.
kind of
Yeah.
amplify that noise because, people are terrified of it. Even though in terms of potency, it's not as formidable as it sounds. But, that doesn't matter because they're going to their nerves are going to be shredded. They're going to dive for cover and everything, even though it doesn't pack the same punch as, say, like, maybe like a group of Lancasters dropping a payload over you.
Yeah, definitely. On the 16th, the of the 132nd Airete Division. They're attacking from the west, and they're met by counterattacks from the 2 and 48th Australian Battalion, who take about 803 prisoners. On the 17th, the 132nd Airete Division, they attack again, some seeing tanks reach the most forward Australian posts, but their infantry failed to follow this up. Now, the British are looking at this and they're seeing a pretty disorganized enemy that are attacking them. So Moore said he orders small raids on the 22nd, and this sees the 2 and 48th Australian Battalion, supported by 3 tanks and a troop of 25 pounders, raid the Fabrice detachment southwest of Ras El Madar. The raiders managed to destroy 2 guns and they seize about 370 prisoners, which is funny if you're thinking about it. So you're besieging this place and they're actually taking some of your men prisoner.
They've taken like 1,000, but
yeah. And simultaneously, the Australian Second Company, 23rd Battalion, they raid the 27th Brasquila Division across the Derna Road, seizing 100 prisoners, which is really embarrassing, honestly, for the Italians.
I mean, I know, like, you know, in the siege, this is kind of like the equivalent of a sortie, but, you know, you kind of do it to destroy the installations, but don't take prisoners rarely.
Yeah. Mind you,
Like,
as I'm laughing talking about this, I couldn't even add this even in this episode. I had written this script a long time ago for KNG. There's a lot of failed raids by the British, and I mean like horrifying large amounts of deaths, not just like casualties and prisoners taken. The British they seem to love throwing commandos at random ports in North Africa.
The long range desert group, right? Because those
the
guys,
long range desert group, they're sometimes successful. It's these kind of like naval amphibious raids that are tossed every now and then. A lot of them go so horribly, and
yeah,
it's tragic. Yeah,
it is. But, you know, speaking, like, you know, we're now like April 16th. The reason, you know, now I see why Churchill really wanted to use this as his Trump rallying card to drum up support, right? Is because this is the only front on land where the Allies are holding their own. Because
True.
actually, if you go back to Greece, the German invasion has started. Okay, so they're invading via Bulgaria. They overrun Yugoslavia, which was initially an ally to Germany, but then a revolution happened and they took over.
Didn't go good for them.
Greece, yeah. So the Germans invade on 6th April. They had this Metaxas line, so it's, I guess, the Greek version of the Maginot line. It's supposed to be heavily fortified position, but that just falls in 3 days. And
yeah,
you know, so at the same time, you know, the army of Greek army of Macedonia surrenders. Okay, so, you know, this is about 67 divisions of the 20 divisions of the Greek army, because the rest are in Epirus. And at the same
British
time,
actually put assets in Greece to try and thwart
Yeah.
this, and it was really just wasted.
yeah, because the British with the imperial forces, right? It had Australian and New Zealanders as well. They land over 56,000 men and, you know, 100 tanks, some 300 aircraft. It's a sizable force. I don't think it would have been enough, considering the Germans are deploying almost 700,000 men in the theater.
Yeah,
But, you know, it's still a force. But the problem is, you know, they are now being pushed back because the panzers are smashing them left, right, and center. So, you know, they're all the way in northern Greece, near where we have like the ancient kingdom of Macedonia. Now they've come down to the Thermopylae Pass. You know, the British try to do another Leonidas's last stand, but everyone knows that powers can be outflanked. But then they
Yeah.
withdraw. So, you know, and right now you have one of the 2 Greek armies has completely surrendered, and, you know, the Greeks are now, our main army in Epirus is about to be outflanked. And at the same time, the Germans are in striking distance of Athens,
which is game
so
over.
this is not good. Yeah, and the thing is, you know, so the British have not even been here for that much time, you know. You know, and I think by 11th or 13th April, like, Wavell was told that, you know, we need to, you know, look at withdrawing the army. That's it, you know, 11th, 13th April. This is just a week after the Germans had invaded. That's how quickly the Greeks collapsed in face of the German onslaught.
And
And
these were forces that could have been in North Africa that could have changed
they
everything.
were, most of them were in North Africa.
Yeah.
So, you have that. And at the same time, by the 20th of April, the main Greek army in Epirus surrenders.
Yep.
And, the thing is, the British were kind of pissed off, and even so was the Greek commander-in-chief, because the British had said, hey, withdraw from Albania, but, the Greeks don't want to do that. And then they got outflanked, cut off from supplies, they surrendered. Because I think the British wanted to keep a united front so that, a smaller area to defend with more men is better, right? So unfortunately, but the thing is, the Greek commander-in-chief Alexander Papagos was already informed by some of his senior staff that the army's morale is utterly low right now. We cannot afford it. So he was kind of pissed off, but I don't think it was too much of a shock for the rest of the Greeks, as the army of Epirus is quickly surrendered. So now the Greece is completely, has unconditionally surrendered to the Germans pretty much. But this is like one thing I kind of like, which kind of highlights the Italian failure. The commander of the army of Epirus, General Sulakoglu, he does not surrender to the Italians. He only wants to surrender only to the Germans.
Yeah.
And Hitler and the German high staff agree, and they give the terms. And that kind of enrages Mussolini, who launches attacks because he wants to be on the table. And this time it's just kind of like, that World War I kind of stalemate attack, because both sides take losses. But, this is just still like the biggest slap in the face yet, in my view, to
Yeah.
Mussolini, that the enemy that you wanted to conquer, they don't want to surrender to you. They just want to surrender to your ally, who's anyways beaten the crap out of them. But yeah, so now we will be looking at within a few days, 21st April onwards, the British are going to start evacuating most of their forces from some people from Attica, that is like the area around Athens, and then they will withdraw further south to the Peloponnese. So this occupies a lot of the time of the Royal Navy. So Admiral Cunningham is quite focused on this.
Oh,
But
definitely.
again, a withdrawal and evacuation. Well, they get about 52,000 men out, which is quite a good chunk. But they've again, like Dunkirk, lost most all their tanks and guns. And if I'm not mistaken, the Germans captured quite a lot of fuel and ration supplies from the British that they were not able to destroy before they withdrew.
Yep.
So, this is again like, a big failure on the Allies, but it kind of just also talks about why, Churchill would harp only about Tobruk at this moment, because that's the only place they are seeing some success. And on land, if I'm not mistaken, that's pretty much going to be the case for the better part of the year.
Yeah, but getting back to the land war, because they have very limited capabilities, the British do decide to perform some bigger raids because they need to do some kind of offensive action. So Colonel Robert Laycox, he forms an ad hoc commando force known as the Lay Force, and they perform a diversionary raid against Bardia. To describe, Bardia is kind of like a smaller Tobruk in many ways. It's a city on the coast. It's got a smaller port. It's strategically not significant, but it's definitely a place you want to hold just to put your supplies. And it's raided on the night of April the 19th with the objective of disrupting the Axis lines of communication. The HMS Glengyle, escorted by the cruiser HMS Coventry and the destroyers HMAS Stuart, Voyager, Waterhen, they launch LCAs, landing the commandos ashore unopposed. The commandos found Bardia just empty of any Axis troops as they destroyed an Italian artillery battery and a supply dump. It's, it was a success. It's not huge, but the raid prompted Rommel to divert an armored brigade to engage the Allies at Salom for rearguard duties. So it is harassing Rommel's rear. The Lay Force was then sent to reinforce the Battle of Crete. However, by the end of May, things in Crete, they turned disastrous, prompting an evacuation of Crete, whereas the detachment of 75 commandos, they're just sent right back to Tobruk. Did you have anything you want to say about Crete?
I mean, Crete right now will become an important point for the Axis, right? Because they decide to invade, and again, we're going to see this as a repeating theme of the war. the just one moment, I just need to just one sec.
Well, no worries. I guess I'll mention to the audience the battle for Crete is actually going to be a bit of a mixed bag for the Germans. It's going to be one of these big operations where the Germans put a lot of paratroopers and gliders into it, and the massive amount of casualties will kind of demoralize the Germans from ever doing such a large paratrooper operation again, because they were thinking about doing something similar with Malta, but it's literally because of Crete and the experience of the paratroopers that Malta will never see a real invasion.
It's actually due to that because, you know, and it's actually a loss, right, when paratroopers get smashed, because you might have conscripts and they'll fill up the rank and file, maybe the armored divisions of your army. But the paratroopers in all the British, American, and German armies, these guys were volunteers within the armed forces.
Yeah.
They were highly trained, highly competitive, highly motivated men. But the underlying problem is these guys will never be able to carry heavy equipment.
Yeah.
And you want to capture an island, well, you need heavy guns, you need heavy tanks, at least in some quantity, or at least create a bridgehead. So, like the idea of, like, say how they were used in D-Day in theory, for example, capture the bridgehead to kind of let the armor and artillery and the main infantry divisions come through. That's probably the only good solution of their use, because as we see, like, at Crete, they do take about almost 6,000 casualties. Like, sure, I mean, they capture the entire island, so it does become an air base for the British. Sorry, the Axis
For the
powers,
Axis, yeah.
which is gonna limit the ability of the Royal Navy. It's still like, you lost 6,000 very highly trained, motivated men. And I think one thing that is not gonna be liked by, the Germans, right? So this was, just give me a second. Because it was actually like within the Battle of Crete itself, the Germans did lose almost 300 aircraft and over
Yeah.
100 more damaged. And considering you're just building up to Barbarossa, this is not good, because you've already taken a battering in the Battle of France. You've now taken a bigger battering in the Battle of Britain. And now you want to prepare for, like, the biggest offensive of German history. So
Yeah, they couldn't
these
really
material
afford it
losses are huge.
for what wasn't that strategically good. Like Crete will
And
offer the Germans some airfields, but it's right in the middle of an Allied hornet nest, so like it's very limited what they can actually do with Crete.
yeah, because I think the reason the Allies also did not defend it too much was, if I'm not mistaken, the command on the Middle East believed that they will actually jump to Cyprus or Syria to try to go to Iraq, because at that time, Iraq's pro-British government had just been overthrown.
Yep.
And this is a threat to the oil fields. Now, this for the Middle East, at least, it's a big issue.
Yeah.
And, then we actually have the British Indian Army under Claude Auchinleck, who's right now the commander-in-chief in India, sending in, soldiers to recapture this so that, they have continued use of the oil. And yeah, he sends in about, one division and two brigade groups. So
True. But getting back to the Lay Force, so they were supposed to go to Battle of Crete. They end up not doing so. So now they're stuck in Tobruk. So they have a new mission, and it's to raid the Twin Pimples. It's a stronghold feature in the Axis line surrounding Tobruk. On the night of July the 17th, 43 commandos alongside some Australian engineers led by Captain M. Keeley, they sneak around this feature to hit it from behind. As the 18th Cavalry, they carry out a diversionary raid to help them out. The commandos quickly overwhelm the Italian defenders they found there in a 4-minute battle as the engineers set up and detonate explosives on an ammunition dump. The raiders depart after suffering a death and 5 wounded. So it's a success, albeit it's kind of a minor, it's a minor raid to be honest, but still anything to
yeah,
improve morale. Now, as hard
yeah,
as the
but
Axis,
this 4-minute battle is just wow.
yeah, as hard as the Axis, they're trying. They can't stop the Royal Navy from resupplying Tobruk, which is a huge issue for their siege. So basically, Rommel's in a bit of a pickle now. So he's got a siege around Tobruk, but it's not really going anywhere. And his logistical lines, they're stretched from Tripoli, which is his main port, it's very far away, to Salam, and he's not really in a good position to invade Egypt because of the situation. If he, in his mind, if they could have Tobruk right now, he thinks that that would actually solve his supply line issue and that he would be able to, invade Egypt. I don't think that would actually be the case. I still think he'd be still in a problematic situation, but in his mind, he probably thinks it was necessary. I'm seeing this weakness. General Wavell, he wants to exploit it. So he initiates a limited offensive, and this one's codenamed Operation Brevity. It's going to be carried out by the 22nd Guards Brigade and elements of the 7th Armored Division, which is kind of like the big armored division for the British at this point, consisting of 29 cruiser tanks, 24 infantry tanks with the support of the RAF. Now, operational command is going to be under Brigadier William Gott, who deployed his forces in 3 columns. The central column, heading for Bir el Kirigat to Sidi Aziz. The desert column to hit the top of the Al Faya Pass to secure Birwar, Musad, Fort Capuzzo, and to raid Bardia. And then there's going to be the coastal column, who's going to work along the coastal road against the lower Halfaya Pass in Solam. I had mentioned this in previous episodes. The best way to see the Halfaya Pass is it's a very strategic bottleneck point in North Africa. The escarpment is kind of underneath it. So if you want to do anything around this area, you basically have to go through the Halfaya Pass. So whoever controls it, you just place your artillery, your anti-tank guns, and your mines and such, and you basically can guarantee any mobile units that come through there are going to get wrecked. So it's extremely good for the defenders, we'll say.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry, I do need to just interject. We did forget one significant event, which I think we should talk about.
Oh, yeah.
6th April, the British suffer a major command blow, which is, Philip Neame, Richard O'Connor, and Brigadier John Coombe,
Yeah.
Now, they get captured by the Germans just because their staff car passes by.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And it is such a bad thing because, Wavell loses 3 very senior and experienced commanders in this one blow. It's insane. Like, they just waltz up to the car pretty much.
Well, I mean, it was because the Axis forces were, they had the edge in speed by far. So, yeah.
True. It's just, because this would have no doubt destroyed Wavell's command structure because he doesn't have that many troops. So obviously not that many generals. And these were the 3 most experienced guys.
Definitely. And there's going to be reports for the Axis that the British tank of where the British are concentrating their tanks. So Rommel strengthens the eastern side of his Tobruk siege, and he expects that there's going to be an offensive. On May the 13th, the central column, so that's the 22nd Guards Brigade, they begin engaging some Bersaglieri companies. So the Bersaglieri is that's the black shirts, I believe, for the Italian formations. I think, yeah. So it's infantrymen, and they're led by Colonel Ugo Montemuro, and they're at the Halfaya Pass. The Italian 47mm anti-tank guns were unable to penetrate the armor of the Matilda II tanks, which has to be demoralizing. I mean, this has been the bane of the Italian situation in North Africa. It's just being unable to deal with the Matilda II tanks.
I wonder if the name Matilda is popular in Italy now.
God knows. And it basically allows the British to seize the Halfaya Pass pretty easily. The Allies they continue up to the Bir War Masad Road towards Fort Capuzzo, and Fort Capuzzo was got its changed hands a few times at this point. It's a very heavily fortified fort, go figure. Nearly 30 panzers supported by anti-tank guns have been deployed behind a ridge near the fort, and they fight a ferocious battle until midday on the 14th. And during the afternoon, a company of the 2nd Scots Guards, they probe Bardia, seeing multiple failed attacks. They can't get through. Meanwhile, the desert columns, the ones more south, like the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment, they start engaging a small panzer force, seeing tank losses on both sides, because I think, if I remember correctly, these were not panzer. I don't think there was many Panzer IIIs at all. And by midday, the 7th Armored Brigade was due west of Fort Capuzzo, and the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment is scouting towards Sidi Azez. Likewise, the Coastal Columns S Company, 2nd Rifle Brigade, supported by some Australian anti-tank guns, they seized the bottom of the Hafaya Pass, taking about 130 Italian prisoners. I think it's actually it's really a blunder on Rommel's part. He probably put the Italians in the Hafaya Pass believing that they'd be able to hold it no matter what, and they kind of crumbled because of their weaponry.
Or, considering also how his relationship has been with the Italian command and soldiers,
Yeah.
may it just like, he could just say, hey, these guys did absolutely nothing. That's why we lost. And,
I mean,
he can
that's
just
kind of
complain to Hitler and
that's
everything.
basically how Rommel plays. The whole North African campaign is he blames the Italians for every loss that they incur. And like I'm like a bandwagoner. I love, like, I'm sorry, I like blaming the Italians too, because like they make a lot of blunders in World War II. But one of the few times that they really did fight pretty well was in North Africa under Rommel. Before Rommel comes over, it's like, yeah, it's kind of comical. But a lot of the
At
Italian
least now
units,
it's
yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because even later we will see like some Italian units despite being so horribly undersupplied. I think it was the Ariete, like a detachment of the Ariete division, because they continue to fight with Rommel's army until the final evacuation from North Africa.
And they fight
Those
like
guys, they fight
hard
quite
battles.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they impressed the British, and I think that time also the Free French who were also attacking their position. And then these guys have to trek back through the desert because they literally leave because they are out of water, food,
Yeah.
ammo.
I mean, they're abandoned. Most of the time, Rommel will, for example, not to go too far ahead, but in some of the engagements at El Alamein, Rommel will just abandon the Italian infantry. Like he'll take his mobile German units, he'll just leave an area, and then the Italians, there's no feasible way for them to even get out, so they just have to give themselves up. And then he'll blame the Italians for doing so. So it's kind of, it's like this. Rommel is forcing these things to happen.
Yeah, and considering he's also cultivated an ego of himself,
Yeah.
and Germany being the senior partner, I think he also knows he'll get his way.
Oh, of course. Now, the Brevity offensive, it caught Rommel's forces off guard, clearly, and it kind of sees a frantic effort from both the Luftwaffe and the Regia Aeronautica to try and defeat the invaders. So to compensate for his retreating infantry and mobile forces, he's just tossing air forces as much as he can. And it kind of quells the Allies from going that much further. But Rommel also reacts by reinforcing the Eastern Front. And he launches a counterattack to recapture the Hatfaya Pass. And this one is nicknamed, it's codenamed Operation Scorpion. So August Maximilian von Herf, he leads a force supported by 160 tanks on May the 15th, divided into groups Vekmar to advance against Dir el Hamra, group Krama against Sidi Suraman, and group Bach over to the escarpment, and group Nab is just following in reserve. Nab is actually, he's controlling basically all the artillery. Over the next few days, von Herf's forces clashed with Gott's central column, forcing them to retreat before recapturing Fort Capuzzo. And I mean, writing so many scripts about the North African campaign, Fort Capuzzo changes hands so many damn times. It's kind of comical. And from Sidi Aziz to Sorambardia's area, the Allies begin pulling back to the Hafaya Pass, which is honestly, it's good for them because whoever controls the Hafaya Pass has kind of an edge in this battle.
It's like that choke point, right? Like you mentioned, it's quite a
I would
few times.
I would call it like a kind of like a battle thermopylae like situation, for a lack of better terms. But by dawn on the 27th, Kramer engages Allied tanks around Hafaya, so just in front. Group Nabe, they attack the head of the pass and they're controlling the artillery. Group Bach is attacking the foot. So if you did have a map in front of you, audience, the Hafaya Pass is actually kind of shown as this being, and it has like a foot and a head and all that. And Group Vekmar, they provide the artillery support on that. The 4th Royal Tank Regiment, they engage them all morning until Brigadier Gott, he has to order a withdrawal. The Axis forces managed to recapture the Hafaya Pass, taking some of the 3rd Battalion Coldstream Guards prisoner. And these guys, unfortunately, were kind of like the main defenders within the pass. Overall, Operation Brevity and Scorpion saw the Allies suffer 206 casualties, with 5 tanks destroyed and 13 damaged. The Germans, they suffer 258 casualties with 3 tanks destroyed, with several damaged, and the Italians suffer nearly 400 casualties, of whom about 347 are captured. So after hearing those numbers, you're probably thinking to yourself that was not a very significant operation, which I just want to mention when I wrote this script way back when, the guy who was editing the scripts, he actually mentioned, he's like, for everything you're writing, this isn't like that significant. And yeah, it's in some ways it's kind of true. It's not like the bigger battles, let's say, but I tried to cover just about every operation. Now, in response to Rommel kind of regaining the momentum again and making some rapid gains, the siege of Tobruk, and of course the ongoing siege of Tobruk, Churchill, he dispatches the Tiger Convoy, which is quite famous. And I don't, do you have anything you want to say about this large convoy, or?
Sorry, actually, Tiger Convoy, I kind of do recall the name, but I can't remember what it was actually.
So
Is it one of those big convoys of about 60,000 tons that reached Malta?
yeah, it was a kind of miraculous that it made it there, but it was also a bit of a gamble because it was fitted with a lot of their armor. So to just go through the numbers, they had 21 light tank Mark 6s, 82 cruiser tanks, including 50 of the new Crusader tanks on this one, 135 Matilda II infantry tanks, and this is all going to reinforce the 7th Armored Brigade. So this is an enormous amount of armor being thrown over, which is definitely going to help, even though they are facing panzers, which is going to hurt them. I think the Crusader tank is definitely going to be a bit of a morale booster, I'd say. But it's going to reach Alexandria on May the 12th, so it's about 238 tanks and 43
Yeah, and
Hurricanes.
actually, I should add one more thing. At the same time, the British from Malta actually did score, at least a few weeks ago, a significant victory over like an Axis convoy. It was called the Battle of the Targio convoy.
Yeah.
And, pretty much I think they sank 2 destroyers, one was beached, and, 4 cargo ships. So, that's about 11,000 tons worth of supplies that was taken away. So, this is showing Malta, the pendulum moment you were talking about, right? When Malta is a threat, Axis convoys are in dire straits, and this actually gives time, for even like, the British to send in support to Malta, right? Like not only like the Tiger Convoy, which was meant for the North African army, but I'm talking about like actual convoys getting fuel, aircraft, and everything to the
Definitely.
the island.
Yeah. And alongside this, the ultra intelligence is indicating that there's going to be an imminent big operation happening in Europe known as Operation Barbarossa. So the British are aware that the Soviet Union is about to get, I mean, there had never been, such an invasion had not been seen on the European continent, I'd say, for quite a long time. And the Axis forces in North Africa, because of Operation Barbarossa, they really can't expect much in terms of reinforcement or supplies. So Rommel he's actually stuck in a hard place because he's unable to advance any further. He wants to, and he is screaming. He's trying to figure out ways to be able to get the supplies he needs to continue, but it's just not possible. And again, knowing this, because the British always, as anybody will tell you in World War II, the British had probably the best intelligence, and they exploit the hell out of this. And Wavell, he's going to initiate another offensive, and it's an attempt to lift the siege of Tobruk, codenamed Operation Battle Axe. So this is going to see about 20,000 troops, nearly 200 tanks, and 200 aircraft going to be attacking Rommel's at this point in this defensive area. He's got about 13,000 men, about 200 tanks, and about 214 aircraft. Battle Axe was to be in 3 stages. So first, the Allies were going to seize back the Hellfire Pass, Solom, Sidi Aziz, and Capuzzo. Then Lieutenant General Beresford Pierce's 23rd Corps, they're going to secure Tobruk and El Edim, if possible. And lastly, the 23rd Corps, they would seize Mecheli and Derna, which would be a hell. If they could do it, that would have been really impressive. However, Wavell's intelligence had really incorrectly assessed that, like 2/3 of Rommel's armor were situated around Tobruk, suggesting that his front lines would be a little bit more thinner when it comes to tank strength. that would not be the case. Rommel, he actually created a line of fortified positions from the Hafaya Pass to Sidi Aziz, equipped with, anti-tank guns, anti-tank mines, and he deployed the 15th Panther Division at the frontier with the 5th Leica Division south of Tobruk, ready to pounce on Tobruk or Sonam. Just for the
I
for
think
the
start of the gardens,
exact well,
Rommel's gardens.
he I don't think he actually even refers to them yet as gardens, but the idea of like defensive boxes and such, this is
Yeah.
beginning. Because what the
Yeah.
Allies and the Axis are learning in North Africa is you can advance, but you're going to come to a point where your logistical line will collapse. And the best way to meet this situation is to dig in and form an enormous defensive pocket, hoping
Mhm.
the enemy will throw an offensive and break on your defenses, and then you can continue to go. And that's like kind of like Rommel's go-to, or I mean, he would like to just keep going on the offensive, but it's just not a reality. And another thing that Rommel's got going for him that the Allies simply don't, while maybe even if the tank situation was what what Waffle had thought, maybe there were most of these tanks being around Tobruk. The mobility of the Germans is much higher than the British. So like
They would be able to thin their
yeah,
tank lines around Tobruk to rapidly re-engage. And we already know that not only do
exactly.
they pack a punch, they're faster.
Yeah, like the 5th Leica Division, these are the fast tanks. They can go just about anywhere they need to, on a word's notice. So basically the Allies, it's not that they're walking into a trap, but they're going to be attacking a line that's going to be a lot more fortified than they think. Now, on the 15th, they're going to open up. The RAF's going to start attacking Axis airfields to try and neutralize them. And they're going to hit the supply columns on the coastal roads repeatedly. And then the Allies are going to toss their three-pronged assault. And this is going to be under fighter cover. However, the Axis forces receive about a 9-hour warning of the offensive that's incoming
Wow.
due to a kind of hilarious blunder. The 7th Armored Division, they have like poor radio signals and, poor radio security. And they just give away basically the entire offensive because they're talking to each other during the assembly.
Might as well just send a telegram to Rommel, right? Telling here's our plan.
And so I'll just mention it to the audience now. While the British they're exploiting ultra intelligence, so like the Enigma machine. So the grand battle orders that the Germans, like wherever the convoys are coming and all these things, like the British are kind of almost playing a game where they know what their opponent's going to do. They're going to continuously blunder on the micro scale side of things. So this situation with the radios and the German tank commanders listening in on Allied radios and figuring out what's going on happens continuously in North Africa. It's a real problem, and it's going to rear its ugly head, especially at LLMN. But so basically, Rommel, he knows the dispositions and he knows the intentions of the Allies at this point. So the coastal force that's advancing on the coastal road and the Halfaya group, they're advancing over the escarpment at this point, and various other units are to the south of the escarpment, which, if you don't have a map, basically you have to think of it this way. If you're on like the south of the escarpment or the north of it, you can't mutually support each other. It's kind of like a natural barrier that's just very difficult for vehicles to get over. So you're isolated pretty much, and the Axis can
It's like
exploit this.
it's two small battlegrounds. per se.
Exactly. So C Squadron of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment, they begin their attack at 6 a.m. and they are decimated within hours by anti-tank guns, seeing only one light tank and one Matilda survive. It's just a terrible loss. Below the escarpment, Matildas were hit by anti-tank mines and multiple infantry assaults fail against the pass. It's not going well early on. The 7th Royal Tank Regiment and the 22nd Guards Brigade, they managed to capture Fort Capuzzo, again, this fort, repelling a counterattack by the 8th Panzer Regiment. The 7th Royal Tank Regiment defeats some Axis forces trying to seize Point 206, but they lose many tanks in the process. And now in the western part of this, the 7th Armored Brigade, they cross the Hatfield Ridge at about 9 o'clock, and they stumble into well-dug-in anti-tank guns, and they're fired upon from point-blank range, losing many tanks in the process. The
Wow,
German
that-
anti-tank guns are extremely effective in World War II, by the way.
Yeah, I think, the reason these and the thing is it's not technically an tank gun that does the killing. It's the famous 88 millimeter flak, which
Yeah.
was designed as an anti-air. But
Yeah, but it's
hey,
effective
it
against armor.
has it because it generates such high muzzle velocity, so these rounds pack a big punch.
Yep. The frontal attacks, they seem almost suicidal as they try to perform flanking maneuvers at a place called Point 208 while artillery is being brought up. However, Point 208 would prove as dangerous as the other places, as, like you were saying, they got the 88 millimeter guns, inflicting egregious casualties upon the Second Royal Tank Regiment, which eventually forces them to pull back. By 5:30 p.m., Allied intelligence indicates that the Axis are now withdrawing from the Haifa Ridge, prompting B Squadron of the 6th Royal Tank Regiment to attack, but turns out to be a trap. Crusader tanks roll up over the ridge, only to be fired again at point-blank range, and within only a few minutes, 11 Crusaders were destroyed, and another 6 are heavily damaged. Again, these were new tanks that were just brought in, kind of the
They
cream of the
were new
crop.
tanks.
Yeah. So
They were new tanks.
this is really bad. This is an egregious
Yeah.
loss. The 5th Panzer Regiment, they arrived to the scene, prompting the 7th Armored Brigade to just pull back. And during the night, the 2nd Scots Guards managed to capture Mossad. On the 16th, the 11th Indian Brigade, they recommenced their attack against the Halfaya Pass, seeing very little progress. At 6 a.m., the 15th Panzer Division, they launched 80 tanks in 2 columns against Fort Capuzzo, who were met by 25 pounders and Matildas. By about 10 a.m., 50 panzers were lost. This is a big loss, honestly, for the Germans. They were fighting finally.
It's like 1/3 of their force.
Yeah, they're facing we kind of are mocking the Matildas, but if the Matilda is stationary and it's in a defensive position, the Matilda is going to be quite dangerous still to these panzers. By 12 o'clock, they're retreating as the Scot Guards capture Solom. Meanwhile, the 5th Leica Division, they're engaging the 7th Armored Brigade and the 7th Support Group around Sidi Omar. The 75 millimeter armed Panzer IV, so the big boys, outgun and outrange the Matildas by about 500 yards, just easily picking them off. There's no battle, really. Like the Matildas just can't answer this. And the Matildas, when they're attempting to close the gap, the Panzer IVs, they're going to just pull back behind anti-tank mines, allowing the Panzer IIIs, who are much faster, to just break them. By nightfall, the 7th Armored Brigade and the 7th Support Group, they have to pull back east of the frontier wire, having lost half of their Crusader tanks, and now they are reduced only to 17 Matilda IIs. Absolutely brutal. These are egregious losses.
especially for armored divisions and brigades.
So pretty emboldened now, Rommel, he rushes the 15th Panzer Division to link up with the 5th Leica Division for like an eastwards thrust towards Sidi Sulaimane, hoping to encircle and eliminate the Allies. But Wavell orders an assault again against the Halfaya Pass in the meantime, and he wants to defend Fort Capuzzo because his units did do quite well defending it the first time. So he has the 4th Armored Brigade join the 7th Armored Brigade to confront the 5th Leica Division, who are advancing now. At about 8 a.m. on the 17th, Rommel's panzers, they reach Sidi Sulaimane, where the 5th Leica Division and the 15th Panzer Division, they strike southwest and northwest together. By 10 a.m., the panzers are engaging the 4th and 7th Armored Brigades and the 7th Support Group. And in a rather shocking move, that threatens the entire offensive, by the way. Wavell is basically, he has to retreat from this. It's too much armor being tossed all at once, and they simply don't have an answer to it. So the Allied tanks, they perform a screen to allow the infantry to retreat towards a place called the Halfway House. During all of this, the Allies had suffered about 1,000 casualties with 122 deaths, almost 600 wounded, nearly about 250 missing, and they lost about 100 tanks and 33 aircraft. For the Axis, the Germans had suffered nearly 700 casualties with about 100 deaths, 350 wounded, 235 missing, and the Italians suffered 600 casualties. For the Axis, for mobile losses, they lost about 12 tanks and 10 aircraft. So looking at those numbers, one could be led to the presumption this was a technological advantage by particularly the German panzers. The British did not have an answer, nor did they have probably tactical know-how how to fight such a panzer force, because we have to imagine the British have been facing the Italians
with armored cars as tanks.
Exactly. So when facing not just a equal foe, in the mobile warfare sector. Someone who has better tanks, probably better tank commanders at that. A lot of these guys saw, action.
And knowing how to use tanks. Like,
Yeah.
we know
Knowing how to use radios in their tanks, unlike the Italians. So that's a big, positive.
that's a big thing.
Yeah. So we're basically looking at what was a one-sided war. Like, I mean, the British were unbelievably defeating the Italians. Let's say the Germans never came to North Africa. We're looking at a campaign that would have gone to Tunisia pretty early and seen the Italians dislodged from North Africa, more or less. Like, I think that was a no-brainer. The Germans,
given that would have been like, I think by end of 41 they could have probably done that.
And that's that's insane. By end of 41, like, that changes World War. There would be dramatic repercussions for World War II. With, I wouldn't say, like, I'm not going to call it a very large force, but with the Afrika Korps, they single-handedly just turned the tide of the entire North African campaign with this. And we're talking about 80,000 tons of supplies. This is all they got going for them for a while. It's very impressive, but again, it's going to show us that despite these tactics, despite the technological advantage that the Germans have at this time, it's going to be logistics that are going to bite them in the ass.
Both sides, to be fair,
Yeah.
and it's already bitten both. Like, that's why the British had such weak defenses, also not because they believed that the Rommel's attack would be months away, but they just did not have the means to support so many soldiers so far from Alexandria and Cairo.
Yeah. And again, I had mentioned it. It goes without saying, in this particular battle, the Germans intercepting the radio signals really showed a high level of incompetence by the British tank command troops. And basically, the British had given away pretty much everything they were doing over the radio waves. And more or less, that's why this battle turned so disastrous. Battle Axe saw the Axis forces controlling the battlefield again. And, for whoever is losing these battles, all of your armor that's out there will be salvaged by the enemy. So the Germans are going to, take whatever is still workable, use it themselves, take parts if they can, and the fuel, whatever they can, they're going to salvage everything, scavenge everything that they can. And this is really going to piss off Churchill. Churchill thought that he thought that they were going to lift the siege of Tobruk, and he's been really pumping the propaganda about how important Tobruk is, which honestly, it's not that important. Yeah. And
but I guess, he did need to show that one place where they were actually holding their own against the Axis.
Yeah, it's true.
So.
And this is going to see our friend Wavel. I keep changing how I say it. I apologize. Wavel.
This is
Wavel, excuse me. So Wavel has he's going to be blamed for most of this, and this is going to see, as you had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, General Sir Claude Auchinleck is going to basically be taking over. So Wavel's going to be coming to the Pacific.
Yeah, I know. They kind of interchange positions at this moment because Claude is kind of like the commander of British India, and Wavel's here, and then for a while they're just going to swap positions. But see, he's made his fair share of mistakes, but I think the main reason was also Churchill just never seemed to, and even like I would say the CIGS, right, the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, I don't think they had a particularly high opinion of him. Because, they'll say, oh, why are you asking for reinforcements or playing defensive when you have 90,000 men? Not considering the fact of either supplying them or the fact that more than half of them at any time were not in combat position. So Wavel was fighting with the biggest chunks of his available combat forces. But, he had to juggle, and he also had to juggle responsibilities not only in Egypt, but, the Italian army had to guard the southern border of Egypt against Ethiopia, the Persian oil fields. So, I won't say he's fully at fault, but he does also have to take a fair share of the blame with some questionable decisions, withdrawing the units the way he does.
Yeah, and Churchill wanted to get rid of him, to be honest.
Yeah. And, we'll see, I think the reason Claude also went it was because, Wavel did not put down the anti-British uprising in Iraq. It was
Yes.
Auchinleck's troops, right? Because Babel was tied up, and so just like, okay, that guy's a go-getter. So, and keep in mind, right now Churchill wants these aggressive, bombastic guys who will say, "Yeah, I can do it. I can take to the offensive," rather than hearing guys who might want to build up the strength before they are ready to attack.
True.
Because for all it's worth, like, while I may not agree with it all the time, but I can see from a PR point of view, it's important to show that kind of attitude, given the situation Britain was in at that time with the war.
Yeah. I'm not sure if
And
there was anything else that you wanted to say about kind of the what we'll call it like the end of Operation Battle Axe, because this is where this podcast is ending, by the way. We're not going to get into the bigger battles yet. That'll be next episode.
yeah, but I think I will just say one thing, like maybe just slightly extending the timeline by a month. The RAF, the Western Desert Force, Air Force, I mean, I
I know
also
I
making
do
the
that.
same mistake.
The Desert Air Force is
Desert
DAF.
Air
Yeah, that's
Force.
what we're supposed to call it.
Yeah. All right. The Desert Air Force. So right now it's called RAF Middle East Command.
Yes.
So we have Air Marshal Arthur Tedder. He calls in um Arthur Conyngham to take over from a bomber group in Britain to take over one of the groups here. And he will lead the Western Desert Force, the Desert Air Force very successfully, right? And, as you'll see, right, especially like, towards the turn of 1942, the amount of damage he does onto the Axis, I think plays I would go as far as saying the most pivotal role in ensuring you know, the Rommel is on the retreat for good after El Alamein.
True.
And, if you would see later on, he is going to be someone who will clash with generals also because of the way he would conduct. But, he has backing of Tedder. But you will see, like, the RAF right now does not have a good reputation in the desert. Like the army and navy feel like they're not doing enough. And, there's no organization or anything. This guy, he will do it. And, you know, as I will discuss later on, the amount of changes he has. So even when they're advancing in retreat, the Desert Air Force is always structured and operationally at its best.
All right. And I just realized I didn't have a chance to say this at the beginning of the podcast. I keep doing that. But if you'd like to support this channel, the best way to do so is to check out www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel, where over there, every single month I put out an exclusive Patreon podcast. You get voting rights for the types of subjects we'll tackle. And it doesn't have to be about the Pacific War. I mean, as you can see here, we're doing a whole North African campaign video. So there's tons of things that we can do. It can be not even World War II related. You can be ancient history, medieval history. I'm not the best at, mind you. Anything you can think of, just toss anything.
That'd be great. Maybe we can just switch eras up.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you get early access to all the content I make. It's a tier system, but the lowest tier, it's $2. It gets you the podcast, it gets you the voting rights and everything. If you want to give more, it's just like if you want to support me more, etc. But I wouldn't. I really want to give something back to the audience. It means a lot to me. And if you don't have any cash to spare, please just, if you're watching this on YouTube, comment on it. Comment what more you want to hear about. Leave a like, subscribe. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, tell your friends to listen. I want to grow this. I want to grow the audio portion of this because I'm a little bit flip-floppy. I'm a YouTuber, but I also do these podcasts and I kind of have my feet in both, oceans. And I think I'm feeling like I need to have a stronger presence on the audio podcast platforms. So hoping
I'm
to
sure
grow
we'll get
there.
there.
Thanks.
Sure we'll get that.
And again, thanks, Gaurov, for being co-hosting this long campaign. It's going to go on probably for another 10 episodes, mind you. Thanks a lot.
Well, I'm definitely enjoying. So once again, thanks for having me here. Looking forward to the next one already.
And it'll be soon. This has been the Pacific War Channel. Over and out.